Yeah, the meeting recording is started.
Okay. Welcome everyone. This is OLM's working group meeting, and today is March 11th. So we have a few items on the agenda, so let's get started. First off, we have a couple of briefs and RFCs that we want to take a look at. So for the first one, we have a draft brief for adding Helm chart support. So I'll leave this to Igor, Edmund, Yash. Said, does anyone want to talk about this?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Hi, this is Igor. So the brief for Helm chart support is kind of like a general statement of how do we incorporate the ability to install, upgrade, uninstall, and overall manage Helm charts as part of the existing APIs, the existing cluster extension and cluster catalog APIs. There's been a couple of discussions, a couple of iterations for this brief, and two major changes that have been incorporated are below, and there's a couple of discussion points. So let's go over first the major change. If you can scroll a little bit more down. Okay, so in the design and architecture, so we initially had a way for the cluster catalog to symbolize an actual Helm chart. We had an attribute called OLM.content_type, and if that was set to Helm, then the controller would know that it's dealing with a Helm chart and branching off to the appropriate part of the POC code. And there is a POC link here somewhere. The major change here is that we don't want to do that because that's an API change, and it's going to be kind of not really appropriate for people who just want to install their catalogs as they are. So we are not marking a Helm chart. Instead, we are trying to auto-detect if a catalog entry that's denoted by a cluster extension is a Helm chart, and we do that at the deployment time, as it says here. Now, for the cluster extension, we do want an ability to pass in. So assuming that is a Helm chart, right? We want the ability to pass in Helm values from the user. So the initial approach was just, a built-in attribute in the cluster extension spec. But then we found out that Nico is working on an RFC called arbitrary configuration, which is linked here. And the RFC has a way to generalize passing any kinds of inputs to a cluster extension, be it Helm or anything else. And there is an example that's talking specifically about Helm configurations. And there is an example there. So that's the approach we went for. I'm not sure why it's not scrolling down.
Right. Probably takes a little bit to load.
So this is basically the way it's going to work. We have if you can scroll up a little bit, there is a way to say kind Helm config over here, and if you go back to the brief, there is an actual demonstration of that regarding to Helm. If you can click on the link that says seen here.
Seen here.
Yeah, so that's a gist. And the gist is showing that I have a cluster extension for metric server, assuming metric server is a Helm chart. It's not marked as a Helm chart anywhere, not even in the catalog. So we have an engine, or supposed to have an engine that detects the fact that it is a Helm chart. And when it does so, then anything that starts here in line 16, 15 actually, but more like 16 is going to be passed in, right? So there's going to be a way to pass in key value pairs. That's line 21. There's going to be a way to pass config maps by name, which is line 24, or secrets, right? Line 26. So that's like the suggested approach. Now, there was a couple of discussions here about what kind of pipeline changes do we need to do. So if we're talking about, and that's a recent comment from yesterday by Joe, if we're talking about operator hub IO, the community operators hub, and we want to incorporate Helm charts in that, what kind of changes do we need to do in the pipeline that publishes to the operator hub? So theoretically, there are no API changes that need to be done, except potentially like oh no, actually not even passing in like cluster extension Helm values or anything like that. But we may need a way to test the Helm chart before we publish it, right? So and we're talking about testing it as a Helm chart, testing its like Helm linting it, testing a cluster extension that it's compatible and valid, things like that. And also, and that's a second discussion point here, so hosting and signing options, Helm supports, Helm has a functionality called Helm Verify, which is signing, basically. It's checks versus a signature, a GPG, I think. So we probably want that, or may want that to be in the pipeline at some point, or as even a standalone verification tool. So I'll just leave it up to discussion here. And that's kind of like the overview. And there is a link here to the POC, which still needs to be updated a little bit. Yeah, and that's the branch. You can look at the diff here for reference. But that's the overall statement is we kind of, and I forgot, sorry, Ankita, I forgot to mention one thing. If you go back to the brief, which is kind of like a trouble spot, if you go all the way up, I
Okay.
forgot to mention it. Scroll a little bit more down. There is a trouble spot here. So it says discussion point, Helm charts. We kind of want to support Helm charts globally, whether they represent an operator or not. I think Joe actually wanted it to be this way, but I'm not sure. So I kind of added it as a discussion point. Obviously, like it's easier to implement, not checking anything, because if we want to limit it to operators only, then we would be looking for things like CRDs inside the Helm chart for in the implementation, and then maybe throwing an error that says there are no CRDs, so this thing is not an operator, etc. But the general statement is we need, like, the discussion point, the general statement for discussion is if we want to have, just any kind of Helm charts in, no matter if they are just an actual product or if they are an operator.
Yeah, that's a very detailed overview of the brief. If does anyone have anything else that they want to bring up or questions?
Camilla has her hands up, and then Edmund.
Okay. Yeah, I see. Okay, go ahead, Camilla.
I really like Igor for such a really great job. Just one question. You say like if the Helm chart is an operator or not, right? What difference that makes for us? If because for example, Kube Builder has a plugin now that is package the operator in Helm chart format and then publish. Then in the chart itself, it has the icon, the description, all these things that could be used by the UI. So what exactly do you mean with that?
So I was kind of thinking more in a general sense of, we're talking about operator lifecycle manager, right? Operator framework. So it kind of makes sense in my head to just say, well, if it's a Helm chart, then it needs to be an operator Helm chart, not just any old Helm chart. But it makes sense from the user point of view to have it as annual Helm chart. So, and then we don't need to even do any extra work in validating on the engine. If it is an operator, if it's not an operator, we don't really need that.
I think next was Edmund.
I have a question, and it's more for the general group as a whole. So today in OpenShift, there is a Helm experience through the developer console, and there's the ongoing work on having Helm supported in OLM v1. Have we, I don't know whether there has been any discussion on what will happen to the developer experience, developer console experience as far as Helm is concerned. But yeah, there would be some concerns if that is to stay because there would be some contradicting or opposing behavior between the two experiences.
My 2 cents is from an upstream perspective, we're trying to make OLM essentially turn into ALM so that we can try to support more use cases and have more growth and a larger audience and a larger community. So sort of to tie back into Igor's question, in my opinion, we don't know what a Helm chart is. A Helm chart is a Helm chart. So OLM is going to support any Helm chart that shows up at its door. In terms of how vendors deal with that, I think it's up to vendors to decide, well, what content are we going to put in front of OLM and organize how we want to present that to our particular users. So I think it's probably going to be the case where OLM can support a lot of different stuff, and then it's up to a vendor to decide if they want to actually expose all of that stuff.
Yeah, before we move on to the next question, just want to make sure we have a few more items on the agenda. So I want to make sure that folks keep time in mind, and let's go to Lala.
So I have a question around the point I think Igor mentioned, a discussion point, right? That Helm charts are global. So we have recently started working on this epic where we want to install registry v1 content into a specific namespace. So how do we handle that in Helm chart? Because do you want to keep the behavior separate for a Helm chart versus registry v1, which is not ideal? But I think that's the main issue, right? Have we discussed that at all?
Registry v1 bundles are global. They obviously, if you have workloads that get installed, they'll end up in a namespace. But registry v1 charts almost always end up installing cluster roles and cluster role bindings. So they're fundamentally global.
Lala, if you're talking about the single and own namespace support, then that's a feature specific to registry v0 bundles that will not have the same kind of support in other engines or runtime like Helm.
Right. So that's what my question is. Is it registry v0 or registry or supporting? I think you're supporting v1, not v0, right? Because you said
Registry
registry
v1 bundles, sorry.
Yeah, so my question is, so that feature is specific for only registry v1. So basically that's the exception.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
We might look into how namespace resources work for both when we move from the cluster extension API to a namespace extension API. There is already a brief for that. I think it's even approved. But work has not been started in that direction. And we have to be really thoughtful what content types we are able to support when we go into a namespace mode again.
Yeah.
I'd also say not only is the is the namespace scoping stuff, registry v1 specific. It's also completely opaque it will be completely opaque to the cluster extension API. So there will be no generic, or I'm sorry, there will be no like specific knowledge in the cluster extension controller that there's this watch namespace thing going on, which is very important to make sure that we don't get back into this question of OLM managing the scope of all of the extensions that it's installed and managing.
Okay, Jordan?
I actually just lowered my hand because I didn't want to take time, but since you called on me, I just have a boring bookkeeping thing, which is that I went and harvested this from Slack channels. It would be good if it's possible. My understanding is this brief is ready to go into review, so we should take it off draft state, and we should also project a target consensus date if review subsides. That's it. Thanks.
That's fair. I think if Igor, you are ready for moving it to review. Moving on, Adam?
Go ahead.
Adam, do you?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Edmund's comment, right? Like from OLM's perspective, right? It just sees content, right? But there's also the bigger discussion of how that content gets published, right? Which none of these things we're talking about, we're covering, right? So where and how do we want the experience for developers to live?
So I expect that for the Helm chart support brief to get to the approved state, we'll need to talk about the full life cycle of all the aspects of that. So we'll need sections that talk about, what are we going to build from a tooling perspective such that we can build Helm charts, push them in the right way, add them to catalogs, validate catalog. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is going to go into the content production side of it that we'll have to figure out as part of the overall brief.
Yeah, so then it becomes, it's not actually a Helm developer experience. It's more akin to an operator developer experience.
I don't think so. I think it's if you have a bunch of Helm
this
charts.
is what I'm keying in on one thing you say. If you need these to go into catalogs, then it needs to be part of the operator experience.
I don't think so. We're trying to expand catalogs to be also more general, right? There's no reason that you couldn't have a catalog of Helm charts that is a random application that's not an operator and have nice upgrade semantics over it.
I'm just saying from a Red Hat business perspective, the two pipelines do completely different things.
Yeah, but I'm saying from an upstream perspective, we want to make sure that tooling exists for upstream OLM that enables Helm chart authors to build catalogs that are just Helm charts.
Okay. Yeah, and we haven't talked about that, correct? That's my understanding.
I don't know that we've explicitly written that down somewhere and got wide consensus on it, but I think that's sort of been the general vibe that the maintainers have had. But you're right. I think we should essentially write that down and make sure that there's not any concerns with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, moving on, Kevin.
I put my hand down because
Okay.
Yep.
If that's everyone, I can move on to we can move on to the next brief that we have, which is about um, benchmarks and performance testing. So, Camilla?
I didn't put the brief in the meeting because it's just a draft. I don't know, Adam. I don't know if Danielle put it. Danielle decided to put it as one.
Oh yeah, because I just saw you mentioned we might want to talk about it in this meeting, but we can um, bring it
We
up later if you want.
No, that is fine.
Oh, okay.
I just want to put without your consent, right?
Yeah.
Because we have something also a performance test for downstream, and then when we are thinking how you do the performance tests, a lot of questions came, right? For example, if we need a Prometheus server that might be hard for upstream, right? Because how we can give you access for everybody? How can we will create a ladder to admin, owners? How we do this stuff, right? In many, we try to capture many challenges, like for example, the Prometheus metrics are cumulative. How will you do the test? Let's see if you can go down. Let's see if we can do just a small review. So we try to put the user case as a maintainer. Then this proposal tries to put alternative approach that it doesn't need the Prometheus server be like it. We don't need a database outside, right? So if you go downstairs, so can you stop? Sorry. So the idea would be like we divide in three phases because it has people from the community also requesting for a pay-proof profile, right? So that is another point. Should we use pay-proof profiling for performance tests? Is a data that we can use or not? I don't know, right? So then how, because it's a lot of things. The first phase, what we are proposing here would be like we do the tests, we save the result of the tests in the repository, and then in the CI checks, we will check with the lists, right? The lists result. Then we don't need the database, the external database, right? That should be the phase one. If you just go more downstairs before Brad make questions, here we have a graph. Go. You can go. And then we have it that you, you can go a little bit more. Sorry. Here would be that the structure a little bit up before the impact here. So something like that if you wanted to use the profile as well, right? The profile and the Prometheus, right? So the idea would be like for each set of tests that we have, at the end we take the metrics and then we save the result. Just the result that matters for us. More or less that, just to share. But I think it would be nice if people read and give their thoughts, right?
Brett, did you want to say anything or?
Yeah, I just want to I'm not sure if either like Camilla or maybe Joe can clarify something from Jean's like P proof of concept PR on the Prometheus solution. It seemed like he wasn't was he actually relying on an external database to store the Prometheus, or did he just sort of discover some aspect of GitHub Actions that was allowing him to
He
store the
was trying.
data?
He was trying. One of the things that we tried to do was like create a Docker image, have the database there, then do a snapshot, and then try to save the snapshot as an artifact in the GitHub, and then using another pull request, right? But that doesn't work very well. So the downstream solution that we have is using the Prometheus server.
Okay, downstream, but not in GitHub. Like there's no easy way to
Yeah,
get that Prometheus data
for
from time to time.
the other option, like it would be like we have a Prometheus, and we store the data for upstream and downstream, and then we try to create labels to split what is upstream or downstream, and create a console, something that the people can access the data. But to manage, we need to manually add people as admins. That is one of the options. Is in the alternative options at the end of this document.
Uh,
All right, cool. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Wasn't sure.
Yeah, so thank you, Camilla, for putting this together. I think we mentioned last week that we wanted a way to get this in front of the community, because the other brief we have has a lot of downstream stuff in it. So yeah, thank you for putting that together. I'd appreciate if people would take a look at that. The other thing I wanted to just mention super briefly is that John is another big contributor to this, and it's kind of unfortunate that he can't join this meeting because we have it timed where it's like 11 p.m. I think, in his time zone. Um, I don't I don't have a solution for that. I just wanted to mention it because it kind of sucks that he can't really be here. But yeah, we can move along.
But it has a lot of open questions, right? Like
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
for example, in the downstream, I understand, maybe I'm wrong, Danielle can help me out. I understand that the initial idea is like we have the historical data and then the CI, because what is our goal? We did something that we scroll up with the performance, right? We need to do the pull request, and the pull request need to fail and let us know.
Mhm.
So in the downstream, the idea was like, let's get the historical data, like the result of that for 30 days, whatever. I don't know how many days, right? But then we will take an average, and then we using the CI as a check. But then it has a problem. Uh, if you go down, can we go down, down?
Real quick, Camilla, I actually wasn't sure where you got the average part from. I don't recall putting
No,
that in the brief.
no. So I understood you wrong because I was speaking with him and I understood. So that is fine. Because if we do that, it has some problems, right? Because, for
Right,
example,
yeah.
if we optimize the stuff and we're still using the average will be higher than the latest value. Or if we put a new feature that we know that will decrease the performance, but we want that, then the next pull request needs to pass in the CI, right? So because this proposal only looking the latest value,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
one that is measured.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And
okay.
thank you for clarifying that for me, Daniel. But it
Yeah, yeah, no worries.
has many open questions, right? How we will
Yeah,
do with our tests, because the metrics they are accumulative, right? So today we have a metric of if we use it for the set of tests, right? For integration tests, whatever. We run, then we have like 2 minutes, right? We add more tests there. Maybe change the metrics. So it's hard, right? It has a section that we try to put the challenge. So things for we think about how you will organize the tests.
right.
It's nice as well, like give it others. I know that it has a lot of people that know more about Prometheus and the metrics than I, so I want to learn. I think that is an interest initiative.
Okay. Thank you for that, Daniel and Camilla.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks, Camille.
moving on.
Thank you, folks. I'm sorry if I tried to speak too fast and it was not very clear, but yeah.
We have a brief for the uh, advanced permission model from Nico.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if this brief has been discussed in this round yet, because I'm usually not able to join. So maybe give me a quick feedback if we should go through it completely or not.
We should go for it, Nico. Go for it.
Okay, doing this a little bit stand up. So the motivation for this brief is with the release of OLM v1, we have introduced a process to limit the permissions on a single cluster extension, right? So compared to OLM v0 was running essentially as cluster admin, and everyone who was able to interact with OLM v0's API to install something was inheriting those permissions directly. Right, so as an administrator, you could not give permissions to use OLM APIs to anyone else, because that user could do whatever with the cluster essentially, because everything was executed in the context of OLM v0's cluster admin permissions. With OLM v1, you have to create a service account and assign scoped permissions to the service account that you link to a cluster extension. And the cluster extension will not be able to go beyond those service accounts permissions. That's nice for separation, but it introduces a few problems as well. So by using service accounts are a namespace resource. So the namespace and the service account has to be pre-created. And it, give me a sec for my notes. Then it makes it harder to delegate permissions to users. The reason for that is that if you have service accounts are primarily designed in Kubernetes to assign permissions to pods, for example. But in Kubernetes, there is no check that prevents users with the permission to create pods from mounting any service account in the same namespace. So by binding our OLM permissions to a service account, we bring administrators into a little bit of a pickle, because they can't give anyone else permissions to touch pods within the namespace, for example, because everyone with permissions to use pods could then also use that service account. And given that it's very complicated, at least at the moment, to generate the right set of permissions for the service account in the first place, it's likely that a lot of those service accounts will in turn be created with cluster admin permissions, which means instead of limiting the attack surface, we're actually broadening it, right? Because there will be more service accounts in the cluster with cluster admin permissions. And this whole brief is about ditching attaching the permissions to service accounts and instead assigning permissions directly to the cluster extension objects by using synthetic user and group names. So what that means is, in vanilla Kubernetes, when you reference a service account as part of a role binding or cluster role binding, that's just syntactic sugar for specifying a username systems : service account : namespace name : service account name. And by using a similar process for referencing this cluster extension directly by saying, hey, you bind role binding to, for example, OLM : cluster extension : the cluster extension name, we would skip the problems with service accounts, and it would also enable users to create blanket permissions for multiple cluster extensions, because we can then also support synthetic group names the same way source accounts do. So source accounts, we also have a global system double colon service accounts group, which can be which we can offer the same for in OLM by having a global OLM double colon cluster extensions group that you can assign permissions to if you are in the context of your cluster not that concerned about scoping permissions to individual installations. That is my quick rundown. Sorry if I have skipped over a few details, but I didn't want to drag this on too long.
I think that was pretty concise, and I did want to ask if it's ready for review. Would you be okay with a consensus state?
I think so, especially because Joe was already so kind and kind of implemented the whole thing. And Pear did a few rounds over the implementation PR to bring it up to snuff. So I think it's the only thing pending now is coming to a conclusion if we want to implement it or not.
So I don't know about everybody, and this is again bookkeeping, and I'm sorry to drone on here, but there are a lot of documents that get discussed in upstream Slack and other venues. So one of the key gateways that I look for a notification perspective is when the document goes to in review state. That generally indicates to me that the authors have landed on what they believe is a good direction for it, and they're ready to accept feedback from other reviewers. And if we're not consistently doing that, it dilutes that signal for sure.
Yeah, I have to admit, I stumbled through this process quite a bit, and then suddenly we had a PR that kind of implemented everything already, and I was out on PTO, so I kind of lost track of where we are in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand completely, and I'm not trying to be punitive in any way, but we have a few here that have kind of fallen into that case, and it's just more difficult for reviewers to track it, and therefore more difficult for authors to get the feedback in a timely manner. So if folks can do that, it'll give good signal, and we can get reviewers marshaled on it.
Perfect. And let's put that into in reviewing. And maybe after this meeting, we can also send out a small message in the community Slack channel saying, hey, this is what is in reviewing right now, just to have a reminder.
That makes sense. Moving on, we have an RFC for, this is the one that was mentioned earlier, right?
Yes, that's why I quickly pasted it in here as well. Igor already talked about this. Kind of perfect timing for it. We were looking into this from the OLM core side because Pear has been exploring how CLI for OLM could look like. And in that context, we wanted to think about how do we pass configuration around generally? And that meshed perfectly into Igor's brief about Helm support as well. I think the brief is ready. We've also linked the other brief that is kind of a little bit in the dependent on this, which is about own and single namespace support.
Yeah.
And yeah, looking for feedback.
And it looks like it's due by the end of the week. So yeah, it would be good if folks keep that in mind. Now,
that date in the document is a little bit arbitrary. I'm not sure how we choose those dates. I just put something in there like a week ago.
yeah, looks like Joe has his hand raised. So
Yeah. Two things, I guess. In terms of the dates, I think we generally like once it goes in review, we want to put it like I can't remember if we picked a date or like a time frame, but I think it was like a week or two. just to give folks time after it goes to the interview state. I kind of think this one has enough meat on it that it would be worthwhile to get all of the interested parties to have a synchronous walkthrough and discussion. If folks think that's a reasonable thing to do. But this, I think, like in my mind, like this is a very major API change that I think needs a lot of eyes and discussion and thought, and just want to make sure we get this right. So, Nico, would you be willing to find a reasonable-ish time to do like a one-off design meeting and invite the community, and we'll see if we can get folks together to go through this in more detail?
Sure. Chatting with you after this call about the invitees.
Sure. Yep.
Moving on to our discussion topics, it looks like the first one is also you, Joe, with about the steering committee elections.
Yeah, so it's been, I don't know, 18 months-ish since we did steering committee elections last. So it's probably, I think we're probably overdue on this. Jordan brought this up at our last steering committee meeting. So I wanted to bring it up here since this is probably the meeting that has the most active operator framework participation. But obviously we should go and try to announce this in as many other operator framework venues as we can. But I think the first step would be to announce that we're going to do them and have someone that volunteers to help run them, which is all very straightforward. Generally, we've done it twice now, and it basically is just send some emails out and set up a poll that we can essentially duplicate from last time. So I think my main outcome that I'd like from this discussion topic is A, does anyone disagree that we should, like, should we not do this? I'd be surprised if anyone did, but just if you disagree, then speak up. And then second, is anyone willing to volunteer to help run it?
I mean, we can also pick this up in the upstream Slack if no one wants to volunteer on the spot.
Yeah.
Moving on, Mikla, you had questions about upgrading from between operators, so between two different operators. Is that?
Yes. Thanks, Ankita. So the situation is briefly the following. I'm working on merging two operators together. Each operator has their own CRDs, and one of the operator is published in a catalog. So we want to combine the operators together. We want a single deployment of operator, manage existing CRDs of both of the old operators. So basically it will be some sort of migration from two different operators into a single operator. And we are looking for ways to upgrade existing users to the new operator. We currently distribute the operator as a Helm chart, both operators as Helm charts, as well as in a OLM catalog. I think at least one of the operators is in an OLM catalog. So the question is, how do we approach it? With current thinking with Helm is that we allow users to probably, Helm is not relevant here. So current thinking with OLM is that we can probably, and I'm talking about OLM v0 for now, we're probably going to suggest removing subscription for the operators and installing a new operator. I think with the CRDs, which already installed with the old version of the operator, OLM will not delete the CRDs and will not delete CRs and will not delete workflows managed by the operator. And we will be able to install a new operator this way. But I'm wondering if it's possible to have something like a replace in a catalog between two different packages. As far as I know, it is not possible today. I know that some people rename the operators, which is technically similar to what we are trying to do, I think, under the hood. So I'm looking for guidance. What's the suggestions that maybe you have, or maybe there are some existing examples of renames or merging like this? Would have any help would be really appreciated.
So I know for a fact, like you said, there has been renames. I know for a fact that if you include in your catalog, if you include upgrade to a different sort of, so you can go from one channel to the other, for example, and that is a big lift in itself. Going from migrating one operator to another operator, that might be a much bigger lift. And we'll have to get back to you on that after doing some research to see if something like that has happened or not yet. But I imagine like there has to be some kind of a migrate, because you're right, OLM will not clean up the CRDs, will not clean up the controllers. So there has to be some custom migration control logic written by the operator itself, going from one to the other.
There,
Um,
there might be one way to do this, which is in your new package name, have a channel that has a skips or replaces of the old CSV name of what you're trying to upgrade from. And Kevin has his hand raised. I'm not sure if he'll refute me or confirm what I just said, but I think that might work.
Yeah, this was a common thing back in the day when we had, usually what it was like somebody was removing their package from the community catalog and putting it in like one of the certified ones. And so what you would basically do is you can add a skips that references the channel, or the references the package that you were referring to, so that it's a synthetic edge. And then I think what you can do is just install your new operator that has that reference, and then it should be able to do an upgrade. I don't know if that still works. It's probably been a couple of years since I've tried it, and the way we build catalogs now is very different, so it might not let you. But yeah, Joe, I think what you're describing, at least in the past, has been able to work. So we would need to probably test it to make sure.
Kevin, did that clear up the old CRDs?
Well, but I think what you actually want, the whole reason you're doing this probably is because you want that CRD to still exist. Right?
Yes,
You
exactly.
across.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like it is not something that is officially supported and officially tested. I'm a bit hesitant going this way, but how about like deleting the subscription and installing a new operator which provides the same TRDs? Is there anything prevents us recommending our users doing this? Are there any? I know that when you install two different operators which provide the same CRD, OLM will complain like, "Hey, there is a conflict. You can't manage. You can't provide CRD which is already provided by someone else." But I don't think there is anything like that when you uninstall something and install, right?
Right. Yeah. If you're looking for something that is slightly more supported, which I think is fair, and you're comfortable with your customers having to do a manual migration, then yes, I believe that what you can do is basically uninstall the operator, remove the subscription, remove the CSV. Then you can the last thing you'll need to do. So there's a way for I believe for basically just like a vanilla CRD to get consumed and owned by an existing, by like basically creating a new subscription, because there's no difference conceptually between that and just like reinstalling an operator that has the same name. I think the only thing you need to check for is I think that we add a label to the CRD itself, and so you'll need to take a look at the labels that get added and maybe remove them. But that should work.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for the pointers.
This question has come up before in many of the same sort of scenarios that you're talking about, Nikolai. I do think it might be worth a new issue. We probably won't do this for OLMv0, but like a way to alias a package or a way to say this whole package is a replacement of this other package. Like there might be good reason for us to go and implement that sort of thing, because then it would be more official rather than I think like a lot of what you're dealing with now is like, yeah, like it's an afterthought and it might work, but we might break it because it's an afterthought, and that's not a great spot to be.
Got it. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think I'm good on this topic, and we have 6 minutes left for another topic, hopefully. And it's like more of a rhetorical question. So I'm currently working on an operator which supports working with multiple clusters. And there is a new kid on the block, which is called multi-cluster runtime, which is an extension to controller runtime, which allows operator authors, write operators, which work with in a different modes with multiple clusters. One of the modes is like reconciling all the clusters in the same way. Another mode is listening to one cluster and applying changes to another or a set of other clusters. I'm just wondering if it's something on the radar, probably not for OLM v0, but maybe for OLM v1, and what are the like maybe there are something basically general question is it on the radar somehow? I can imagine that there will be maybe some post-installation configuration for that, or maybe OLM will want to handle cases when you prevent installing the same operator, the same multi-cluster operator on multiple clusters or something like that. I don't know. Like, is there anything you want to? Is there anything we need to think about on the OLM v1 side for that?
As far as I know, there's nothing that we've put on the roadmap of OLM v1 itself being multi-cluster aware in terms of managing extensions that are multi-cluster aware. I would imagine that that would basically just work. And in terms of like doing configuration, the registry v1 format just isn't very configurable. And what you would want to configure on a registry v1 bundle for multi-cluster probably couldn't be done using OLM APIs. You'd have to figure out an out-of-band way to set up the configuration there. For OLM v1, I could imagine when we add support for Helm charts, you have a Helm chart for your multi-cluster aware thing that has a value schema that says you need to tell me what clusters I'm supposed to talk to, and then the templating can go and make the configuration what you want.
Yeah, I was thinking that arbitrary configuration or whatever it's called is going to be handy here. And I think I agree with you. It should probably work without extra changes on the OLM side, unless we just want to manage somehow the coordination between clusters within OLM to prevent users installing the same thing on multiple clusters. But I think it's just maybe it's a bit too much of a hassle. Maybe it's just something like if users configured it this way to conflict with each other, then they are at fault, and OLM should not be in the business of managing this.
I wouldn't say never, but it's just not a focus right now.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a completely good answer for me. Thanks.
Nico, did you have something that you wanted to?
I just wanted to quickly say the one angle that there might be for OLM v0, v1 for multi-cluster is the topic about hypershift. Right? In hypershift, there is a need to deploy operators in a split deployment mode, meaning that the configuration, custom resource definitions, etc., get installed into the hosted clusters API, the hosted clusters kube API server, while the actual operator manager pod runs on the management cluster side. So there is potential for us to look into at least limited multi-cluster within OLM itself in the future. But as Joe has already pointed out, nothing we can do in the short term about that.
All right. As considering we have a minute left, I don't know if we have enough time to.
We should skip this roadmap check-in. That's fine.
In that case, I think we have gotten through the rest of the agenda. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Just one request is that we probably have done some features recently in we already merged them in upstream code. Maybe we should do demos. For example, I think there are a couple of items. Probably I can list them in Slack, and then we can plan to do some demos in this meeting. I think that would be helpful in general for the community.
That should be worthwhile. We should start an upstream thread for adding demos to our next.
Yeah, next meeting. Thanks, Ankita.
Thank you.